The little girl's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the rope. Her dog skin stretched over Bones' ribs you could count from 10 feet away, swayed on his paws like he might fall any second. She looked up at the biker with eyes that had seen too much, and when she opened her mouth, her voice cracked on every word. "Please, sir. We haven't eaten in 3 days. Take him. Please, just take him so he doesn't die." The parking lot went silent. 12 grown men, tattooed, leather-clad, the kind people cross the street to avoid, froze like someone had hit pause on the world. If you want to know what happened next, subscribe to this channel right now, stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Troy Stone had been riding for 32 years, and he'd seen a lot of things that made him wish he hadn't. But he'd never seen anything like this. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was tangled, her clothes hung loose like they'd been bought for someone bigger, and her sneakers had holes worn clear through the canvas. She stood in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, holding a frayed rope, and at the end of that rope was a golden retriever that looked more like a ghost than a dog. Troy had pulled into the lot with his crew, 11 other members of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, for their usual Sunday breakfast. They'd been riding since dawn, the kind of ride that cleared your head and reminded you why you kept getting back on the bike, even when your knees ached and your back complained. The sun was barely up, the air still had that morning chill, and Troy was thinking about coffee and eggs, and nothing more complicated than that. Then he saw her. She was standing near the entrance, watching them park their bikes. Most kids got excited when they saw the Brotherhood roll up. They'd point and wave and ask if they could sit on the Harleys. This girl just stood there perfectly still, holding that rope with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away. Troy killed his engine and swung off the bike. His knees popped. Too many years, too many miles, but he ignored it. Something about the way she was standing made his chest tighten. "Rev," he said quietly. "You seeing this?" Rev, real name Robert Hayes, 53 years old, got his road name because he'd been a reverend before he traded the pulpit for the highway, pulled off his helmet, and squinted across the parking lot. "Yeah," Rev said slowly. "I'm seeing it." The girl took a step forward, then another. The dog stumbled behind her, and she stopped, waiting for him to catch up. "Troy," Doc said from somewhere behind him. Doc was the club's medic, former Army, did 2 tours in Iraq before he came home and decided he'd seen enough blood for one lifetime. That dog needs a vet, like yesterday. Troy knew. He could see it from here. The retriever's coat was dull and patchy, his eyes sunken, his movements slow and uncertain. The kind of slow that came from a body shutting down one system at a time. The girl reached them and stopped. She looked up at Troy, and he saw that her eyes were gray, storm cloud gray, the kind of gray that made you think of rain and cold nights and being alone. She opened her mouth closed. It tried again. "Please," she whispered. Troy crouched down slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. He'd learned a long time ago that some people, especially small people, especially people who'd been hurt, needed to see your hands. "Hey there," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Olivia." Her voice was barely audible. "Olivia Miller." "Olivia? That's a real pretty name." "I'm Troy. These are my friends." He gestured behind him without turning around. "What can we do for you, sweetheart?" Her chin started to tremble. She looked down at the dog, then back at Troy, and when she spoke again, her voice broke into pieces. "We haven't eaten in 3 days. Me and Buddy. My mom, she's sleeping in the car and she doesn't know I came here, but I can't watch him die." The words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "So please, please just take him. Take him somewhere he can eat. I don't care if I never see him again. He's such a good boy, and he doesn't deserve this, so please." Whoa, slow down." Troy's chest felt like someone was squeezing it. "Olivia, honey, where's your dad?" Her face crumpled. "He's sick. He's really sick. He used to work at the factory, but they fired him, and now we don't have anywhere to live, and..." Okay, I need you to take a breath for me." Troy glanced back at his crew. Every single one of them was standing perfectly still, and he saw the same expression on all their faces. The expression that said they'd just stepped into something that was going to change the rest of their day, maybe longer than that. Olivia was crying now, silent tears that ran down her cheeks and dripped off her chin. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be bothering you. I didn't know what else to do." Troy felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd been a Marine for 8 years before an IED in Fallujah sent him home with a purple heart and a limp he'd carry for the rest of his life. He'd seen things that haunted him, done things he tried not to think about, and when he came back, he'd looked for something, anything that felt like purpose. He'd found it with the Brotherhood, found it in the ride in the brothers who watched his back and the work they did for families who needed help and had nowhere else to turn. But this was different. This wasn't a family asking for help. This was a child offering to give up the thing she loved most in the world because she thought it was the only way to save him. "Olivia," Troy said quietly, "I'm not taking your dog." Her eyes went wide. "But I'm not taking him because he's yours and he belongs with you. But I am going to help. Me and my brothers here, we're going to make sure you and Buddy get taken care of. Both of you. You understand?" She stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "Where's your mom right now?" Troy asked. Olivia pointed across the parking lot. Troy followed her finger and saw a beat-up sedan parked in the far corner, windows tinted with what looked like layers of dirt and grime, the kind of car that had seen better decades. "Rev," Troy said without looking away from Olivia. "Go wake her up, gentle, explain who we are. Doc, you take a look at the dog. Olivia, you come with me. We're going to get you and Buddy some food, and then we're going to figure this out." "But," Olivia started. "No buts. That's an order." Troy smiled, trying to take the edge off. "You came to the right people, sweetheart. We don't leave family behind. And right now, you're family." Rev headed toward the sedan. Doc knelt down next to Buddy, running his hands gently over the dog's ribs, checking his gums, looking in his ears. The rest of the crew formed a loose circle blocking the view from the street. Nobody said anything, but Troy knew what they were thinking. They were thinking the same thing he was. Somebody was going to pay for this. Inside the diner, Troy guided Olivia to a booth in the back. The place was mostly empty, just a few early morning regulars nursing coffee and reading newspapers. Rosie herself came over, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that didn't miss much. "Troy," she said. Then she looked at Olivia and her expression shifted. "Oh, honey." "Rosie, we need breakfast. A lot of it. And some plain chicken for the dog outside. Maybe some rice if you've got it." "Consider it done." Rosie didn't ask questions. She'd been feeding the Brotherhood for 15 years, and she'd learned a long time ago that when they brought someone in, there was always a story. She disappeared into the kitchen. Troy slid into the booth across from Olivia. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the table. "Olivia," Troy said gently, "I need you to tell me what happened. All of it. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. When she started talking, her voice was so quiet, he had to lean forward to hear. "My dad used to work at Pritchard Manufacturing," she said. "He worked there for 12 years. He made parts for cars. He was really good at it. My mom said he was the best in his department." "What's your dad's name?" "Michael Miller." She twisted her hands together. 6 months ago, he started getting really tired. Like he'd come home from work and just fall asleep on the couch. My mom kept telling him to go to the doctor, but he said we couldn't afford it. Our insurance wasn't very good." Troy felt his jaw tighten. He knew where this was going. "Then one day he collapsed," Olivia continued, "right there on the factory floor. They called an ambulance and everything. At the hospital, the doctors did a bunch of tests, and they said he has cancer in his stomach, and it's bad." "Jesus," Troy muttered. "The doctor said he needed treatment right away. Chemo something. But Mr. Pritchard, that's my dad's boss. He said my dad couldn't have time off for treatment. He said if my dad missed work, he'd be fired. My dad tried to explain, but Mr. Pritchard didn't care. He said the company couldn't afford to keep someone who was unreliable." Troy's hands curled into fists on the table. "Did he fire your dad?" "He waited until my dad missed his first day of treatment. Then he fired him. And when he fired him, he said it was for she struggled with the word, for misconduct, so he couldn't get unemployment, and the insurance ended right away." "What happened then?" My mom tried to find work, but she couldn't find anything that paid enough, and the medical bills kept coming. The hospital wanted thousands and thousands of dollars for my dad's treatment. We sold our furniture. We sold my mom's car. We sold almost everything we had, but it wasn't enough. Rosie came back with a plate piled high with pancakes, eggs, bacon, and toast. She set it down in front of Olivia without a word and left just as quickly. Olivia stared at the food like she couldn't believe it was real. "Eat," Troy said gently. "Go ahead." She picked up a fork with trembling hands and took a small bite of pancake. Then another. Then she was eating like she'd forgotten how to stop, tears streaming down her face the entire time. Troy looked away, giving her privacy. Through the window, he could see Rev standing next to the sedan talking to someone in the driver's seat. Doc was still with Buddy, who was lying on the pavement now. The dog's tail moved just barely when Doc scratched behind his ears. "Olivia," Troy said after a minute. "What about your apartment? Where were you living?" She swallowed hard. "We had an apartment on Mason Street. We lived there for 5 years. But then," her voice dropped even lower, "then Mr. Morrison came." "Who's Mr. Morrison?" "He owns the building. He's owned it forever. But after my dad got fired, Mr. Morrison raised our rent. He said there was new market conditions or something. My mom tried to tell him we couldn't afford it, but he said if we couldn't pay, we had to leave." "How much did he raise it?" "It used to be $900 a month. He raised it to $1,500. Troy closed his eyes. $1,500 a month for an apartment on Mason Street, a neighborhood where half the buildings were falling apart, and the other half should have been condemned years ago. It was price gouging, pure and simple, raising rent on a family he knew was struggling, squeezing them until they broke. "We couldn't pay," Olivia whispered. "So he evicted us. We had 30 days to get out. But we didn't have anywhere to go. My mom's parents are dead, and my dad's parents live in Florida, and they're really old and can't help. We applied for shelters, but they were all full. So we've been living in the car. It's been 6 weeks." 6 weeks. This child had been living in a car for 6 weeks, watching her father die and her dog starve because 2 men, Pritchard and Morrison, had decided that profit mattered more than people. Troy stood up. "Finish your breakfast," he said. "I'll be right back." He walked outside. The morning was warmer now, the sun climbing higher. Rev saw him coming and met him halfway. "Her mom's name is Sarah," Rev said quietly. "She's awake, scared out of her mind, but awake. She thought Olivia was still asleep in the back seat. When I told her what Olivia tried to do..." He trailed off, shaking his head. She confirmed the story. "Yeah, everything the kid said is true. Dad's name is Michael Miller, diagnosed with stage 3 stomach cancer 6 months ago. Boss fired him under false pretenses. Landlord jacked up the rent to force them out. They're living in that car with no money, no food, no options. Michael's in the back seat right now. Troy, he's bad, real bad. He needs a hospital." Troy looked at the sedan. Through the dirty windshield, he could see a woman in the front seat, thin-worn, staring straight ahead with the kind of expression that came from being so far past exhausted that you couldn't remember what rest felt like. In the back seat, he could just make out the shape of a man lying down. "Names," Troy said. "I need names." She gave them to me already. Gerald Pritchard owns Pritchard Manufacturing on Industrial Drive. Frank Morrison owns Morrison Properties Guys, a slumlord, owns half the cheap housing in this city. Troy pulled out his phone and started texting. Within seconds, his phone buzzed with responses. One text came from Chains, the Brotherhood's VP, on it. "Give me an hour." Another came from Diesel, their sergeant-at-arms. "I know Pritchard. Guy's dirty. I'll make some calls." A third from Nomad. "Their road captain Morrison evicted my cousin 2 years ago. Same scam. Let me dig." Troy put his phone away and looked at Reverend. "Get Sarah and Michael to Doc. Tell Doc to stabilize Michael. I don't care what it takes. Then get them to County Medical. Tell them the Brotherhood is covering expenses. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can talk to me." "What are you going to do?" Troy looked back toward the diner where Olivia was visible through the window, still eating like every bite might be her last. "I'm going to make sure that little girl never has to choose between herself and her dog again," Troy said. "And then I'm going to have a conversation with Gerald Pritchard and Frank Morrison. A real educational conversation." Rev smiled the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Want company?" "Yeah. Get Diesel and Chains. And Rev, bring the cameras. I want everything on record. You expecting trouble? No, Troy said. I'm expecting justice. But in case we only get trouble, I want proof of what we did and why. 20 minutes later, Olivia sat in the booth, with a full stomach for the first time in days, watching through the window as her mother and father were loaded into Chains's pickup truck. Doc sat in the back with Michael monitoring his pulse. Sarah stood next to the truck, looking back at the diner with an expression that was equal parts terror and hope. Troy walked over to her. Mrs. Miller, I'm Troy Stone. I run the Iron Brotherhood. Your daughter came to us for help, and we're going to make sure you get it. Doc's going to take your husband to county medical. They're going to admit him and start treatment. The bills are covered, all of them. Don't argue with me about it, just let us help. Sarah's face crumpled. I don't understand. Why would you? We're nobody. We're nothing. You're not nothing, Troy said firmly. You're people, and you're in trouble, and that's all we need to know. Now I need you to tell me something. The men who did this to you, Pritchard and Morrison, are there others? Other families they've hurt the same way? Sarah's eyes hardened. Dozens, maybe more. Everyone knows what they do. They find families who are struggling and they squeeze them until there's nothing left. But nobody ever does anything about it because they have money and lawyers and... Her voice broke. And we have nothing. Not anymore, Troy said. Now you have us. He walked back to the diner. Olivia was standing now, pressed against the window, watching Buddy eat chicken and rice from a bowl Doc had set out. The dog was eating slowly, too slowly, but he was eating. His tail wagged weakly. Olivia, Troy said, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mom and dad are going to the hospital right now. Doc's going to make sure your dad gets the treatment he needs. You and Buddy are going to stay with my wife Linda for a few days. She's got a big house and a big yard, and she loves dogs. You'll be safe there. You understand? Olivia looked up at him with those storm cloud eyes. What are you going to do? Troy crouched down to her level again. I'm going to talk to the men who hurt your family. I'm going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Will you hurt them? The question caught him off guard. Troy thought about it for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I'm going to make them face what they did, he said finally. Sometimes that hurts worse than any punch. But no, sweetheart. We don't solve problems with violence. We solve them with truth. And we're very, very good at finding the truth. Olivia studied his face like she was looking for a lie. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Troy stood. He looked at his crew, Rev, Doc, Diesel Chains, and the others. Men who'd served their country, raised families, buried friends, and decided somewhere along the way that the system wasn't working fast enough for the people who needed it most. Men who'd taken justice into their own hands, not because they wanted to, but because somebody had to. Mount up, Troy said. We've got work to do. They didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something bigger than one family, bigger than one town. This was the beginning of a reckoning. And Gerald Pritchard and Frank Morrison were about to learn what happened when the Iron Brotherhood decided you'd crossed the line. Outside, engines roared to life. 12 Harleys, 12 men, and one little girl's desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would finally hear her. They heard her, and now the whole damn town was about to hear them. Olivia watched from the diner window as the bikers lined up their motorcycles in formation. The morning sun glinted off chrome and leather, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt hope. The convoy split at the highway junction. Doc took Sarah and Michael east toward County Medical and Chains's truck, while Troy led the remaining 10 bikes west toward downtown. The engines created a sound that made windows rattle 3 blocks away, a rolling thunder that announced their presence long before anyone could see them coming. Troy's phone buzzed against his chest. He pulled over the others following suit. The text was from Chains, who'd stayed behind with Doc. Michael's stable. Barely. Doc says another week and we'd be planning a funeral. Sarah won't stop crying. She keeps asking why we're helping. Troy typed back with one hand, because nobody else did. Another text came through, this one from Nomad. Found something. Morrison's got a pattern. 47 families evicted in 18 months. All rent hikes between 40 to 70%. All during personal crises. I've got names, addresses, documentation. Troy showed the message to Rev, who was idling next to him. 47, Rev said quietly. Jesus Christ. It's worse than that, Diesel called from 2 bikes over. He was holding his phone up. I just got off with Tommy Reeves, works security at Pritchard Manufacturing. Says Pritchard's been doing the same thing for years. Fires people right after they file for medical leave. Calls it performance-based termination. Tommy says there's at least 30 cases in the last 3 years alone. Troy felt the rage building in his chest, the kind that started cold and got colder the longer you held it. He'd learned in the Marines that the angriest men weren't the ones who yelled and threw punches. The angriest men were the ones who got quiet, who channeled everything into precision and purpose. Reaper, Troy said, looking at a lean man with gray in his beard. You still know that reporter at Channel 7? Jessica Vance. Yeah, we go back. Call her. Tell her the Brotherhood's got a story she's going to want to see. Tell her to have cameras ready outside Morrison Properties by noon. Don't give her details yet, just tell her to be there. Reaper nodded and pulled out his phone. Troy looked at the rest of his crew. Here's how this works. We split into 3 teams. Rev, you take Wrench and Spider go to Pritchard Manufacturing. Talk to the workers. Find out who else got fired under suspicious circumstances. Get names, get dates, get everything. Diesel, you take Gunner and Reaper go to Morrison's Properties. Talk to the tenants, especially the ones who got evicted. Same thing, names, dates, documentation. I'm taking Tiny and Hammer to the county clerk's office. Morrison's a landlord, which means he's got to file paperwork. I want to see every eviction notice, every rent increase, every complaint filed against him. What are we looking for? Wrench asked. Proof, Troy said. Enough proof that when we confront these bastards, there's no wiggle room. No lawyers, no excuses, no hiding behind legal gray areas. We're going to build a case so airtight that even a corrupt judge couldn't ignore it. And if they lawyer up anyway? Tiny asked. Tiny was 6'5" and 300 pounds, and his voice sounded like gravel in a blender. Troy smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Then we take it to the press, the community, and anyone else who will listen. We make so much noise that City Hall has no choice but to act. These men made their money in the shadows. Let's see how they do in the light. They scattered. Rev pulled up outside Pritchard Manufacturing 40 minutes later, Wrench and Spider flanking him. The factory was a sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. The parking lot was half empty. Second shift didn't start until 2. A man in a security uniform stood near the gate smoking a cigarette. Rev recognized him from Diesel's description. Tommy Reeves, mid-40s, former Army, the kind of guy who took the security job because he needed the paycheck, but hated what the paycheck required him to ignore. Tommy, Rev said, pulling off his helmet. Tommy looked at the 3 bikers and didn't seem surprised. Diesel called me, said you'd be coming. We need to talk to people who worked with Michael Miller, people who saw what happened when Pritchard fired him. Tommy took a long drag on his cigarette. Most of them are scared. Pritchard's got a reputation. You speak up, you lose your job. You lose your job in this town, you lose everything. What if we guarantee their anonymity? Rev asked. How? We're building a case. We're going to take Pritchard down, but we need witnesses. People who'll go on record about what he's done. If they're worried about retaliation, we can help. The Brotherhood's got lawyers, got resources. We protect our people. Tommy studied Rev's face for a long moment. Then he dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. There's a woman named Carla Hughes. Worked in assembly for 15 years. She was there when Michael collapsed. She's the one who called 911. She tried to stand up for him when Pritchard fired him, and Pritchard threatened to fire her too. She's got 2 kids and a mortgage. She kept her mouth shut. Where can we find her? She's on shift right now, but she takes her lunch break at noon in her car. Tan Camry parked on the west side of the lot. Tommy paused. Tell her I sent you. Tell her I said it's time somebody fought back. Rev nodded. You're a good man, Tommy. No, Tommy said quietly. I'm a man who's been keeping his head down for too long, but maybe that changes today. Across town, Troy stood in the county clerk's office staring at a computer screen that showed 3 years of eviction records filed by Frank Morrison. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who looked like she'd been chewing glass all morning, had initially refused to help until Troy explained very calmly that all eviction records were public information, and if she didn't provide them willingly, he'd file a formal request that would make her job much more complicated. She'd provided them. Jesus, Hammer muttered, looking over Troy's shoulder. Look at the dates. Troy was looking. Morrison had filed 47 eviction notices in the past 18 months, but the pattern was even darker than that. Every single eviction came within 30 days of a documented personal crisis job loss, medical emergency family death. It was right there in the court filings the reasons tenants gave for falling behind on rent. And every single time, Morrison had raised the rent immediately before filing eviction. He's hunting them, Troy said slowly. He's specifically targeting families in crisis because he knows they can't fight back. Tiny leaned in. Why would he do that? Wouldn't it make more sense to keep reliable tenants? Troy scrolled through more records. Look at what happens after the evictions. He re-rents the same apartments at twice the price to new tenants. He's using the crisis to justify the rent increase, forcing out the old tenants, then renting to people who can afford the new rate. He's gentrifying his own properties one family at a time. Patricia cleared her throat. I shouldn't be telling you this, but Morrison's been under investigation before. 3 years ago, a group of tenants filed a complaint with the housing authority. Morrison buried it in legal motions until they ran out of money for lawyers. The case got dismissed. You have records of that case. I might have made copies before they were archived. She slid a manila folder across the desk. Hypothetically. Troy met her eyes. Why? Because I've worked here for 22 years and I've watched men like Morrison destroy families while hiding behind paperwork. Somebody needs to stop them. She paused. I'm glad it's you. Troy took the folder. Inside were depositions, financial records, complaints, everything they needed. Thank you, Patricia, he said quietly. Don't thank me. Just finish it. At Morrison Properties, Diesel stood outside a duplex on Mason Street talking to a woman named Rita Gonzalez. She was 48, worked 2 jobs, and Morrison had evicted her 11 months ago after her son was hospitalized with a ruptured appendix. The rent was $850, Rita said, her voice shaking with anger she'd clearly been holding back for almost a year. I was never late, not once in 6 years. Then Diego got sick. The hospital bill was $16,000. I told Morrison I needed 2 weeks to sort out the finances. You know what he did? Diesel waited. He raised my rent to $1,300 and gave me 30 days to pay everything I owed, including the new rate, or get out. When I said I couldn't, he filed eviction. I had to move in with my sister. 3 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment. Diego's 23, and he sleeps on the couch because there's nowhere else. Where are you living now? Still with my sister. I can't afford anything else. Morrison blacklisted me with every other landlord in town. Says I have an eviction on my record, so nobody will rent to me. Diesel felt his jaw tighten. Rita, I need you to write down everything that happened. Dates, conversations, documentation. Can you do that? What's the point? I already tried fighting him. He's got lawyers. He's got lawyers, Diesel agreed. We've got something better. We've got the truth, and we've got numbers. You're not the first person he's done this to. You're not even the 10th. We're gathering everyone he's hurt, and we're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Rita's eyes filled with tears. You really think you can stop him? Ma'am, I know we can, but we need you to trust us. Will you help? She nodded slowly. Okay. Okay, yes. Tell me what you need. By 11:30, all 3 teams converged at the clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the edge of town that served as the Brotherhood's headquarters. The main room had a bar, a pool table, and a long wooden table covered in maps and papers. Troy spread out everything they'd gathered. 47 evictions by Morrison, 32 wrongful terminations by Pritchard. Names, dates, financial records, witness statements. Some people had agreed to go on record. Others were still too scared, but they'd provided documentation anonymously. It's enough, Rev said, studying the papers. It's more than enough. Troy's phone rang. He answered. Troy, it's Jessica Vance from Channel 7. Reaper said you had something for me. What am I looking at? Corporate exploitation on a scale that's going to make City Hall very uncomfortable, Troy said. How fast can you get a camera crew to Morrison Properties? I'm already here. Reaper wasn't subtle. What's happening? You're about to watch the Iron Brotherhood hold two men accountable for destroying dozens of families. Bring your cameras. Bring your microphones. And Jessica. This is the kind of story that wins awards. Don't miss it. He hung up and looked at his crew. 12 bikes. We ride together. We park outside Morrison's office first. When we're done there, we go to Pritchard Manufacturing. Cameras will be rolling. Press will be watching. This is not about intimidation. It's about exposure. We're going to hand them all the evidence, and we're going to do it in front of the whole town. Everyone understand. 11 voices answered as one. Yes, sir. Yes. Then let's ride. The convoy rolled down Main Street at exactly noon. People on the sidewalks stopped and stared. Cars pulled over. Store owners came to their windows. The Brotherhood didn't ride through downtown very often. When they did, it meant something was happening. Morrison Properties occupied a corner building with big glass windows and a sign that tried too hard to look professional. Troy counted 3 news vans already parked outside. Jessica Vance stood on the sidewalk with her crew camera already rolling. Troy parked his bike directly in front of the entrance. The others formed a line beside him, engines idling. The sound was enormous, a physical presence that made the windows vibrate. Frank Morrison appeared at the door. He was 56, soft around the middle, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Rita Gonzalez made in a month. His face was red, his expression somewhere between confused and furious. "You can't park here," he shouted over the engines. "This is private property. I'm calling the police." Troy killed his engine. One by one, the others did the same. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. "Please do," Troy said calmly. He held up the manila folder Patricia had given him. "I'd love for the police to see this. I'd love for them to explain how you've evicted 47 families in 18 months, every single one during a documented personal crisis. I'd love for them to explain how that's legal." Morrison's face went from red to white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No." Troy opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Rita Gonzalez, evicted after her son required emergency surgery. Rent raised from $850 to $1,300. He pulled out another sheet. "David Chen, evicted after he lost his job when the factory closed. Rent raised from $900 to $1,500. Another sheet. "The Miller family, evicted after the father was diagnosed with cancer. Rent raised from $900 to $1,500. Jessica Vance was right there with her microphone. "Mr. Morrison, do you have a response to these allegations?" Morrison's mouth opened and closed. "This is harassment. I run a legitimate business." "You run a predatory operation," Troy said, his voice carrying across the street. "You target families when they're most vulnerable, raise their rent to prices. You know they can't afford, then evict them, so you can rent to someone else at an even higher price. And you've been doing it for years." A crowd was gathering now. Tenants from Morrison's Properties, people from the neighborhood, local business owners. Someone shouted, "He did it to my brother too." Another voice, "He evicted my mother." Morrison looked around wildly. "You have no proof of anything. Your lawyers will have a hard time defending you when the evidence is public record," Troy interrupted. He turned to Jessica Vance. "Everything I'm holding is available at the county clerk's office. Eviction notices, rent increases, complaints. It's all there. Anyone who wants to verify can do it themselves." Jessica's cameraman was getting all of it. Morrison backing toward his office door, the crowd getting larger. Troy standing calm and steady with the evidence in his hands. "Mr. Morrison," Jessica called, "are you denying that you specifically target families in crisis?" This is a smear campaign. These bikers, Troy said quietly, and something in his voice made everyone stop talking, "are standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. We're doing what the system failed to do. We're holding you accountable." Morrison's lawyer arrived, then a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd been interrupted during lunch. He took one look at the cameras, the crowd, and the folder in Troy's hands, and Troy saw the exact moment the lawyer realized his client was in serious trouble. "My client has no further comment," the lawyer said quickly. "Any questions should be directed to our office." That's fine, Troy said. Because we're not here to ask questions. We're here to make a statement. Frank Morrison has destroyed 47 families in this town. The evidence is public. The press has it. The people have it. And now the police are going to have it too. As if on cue, 2 patrol cars pulled up. Officers stepped out, looking confused about what they'd walked into. Troy handed the folder to the nearest officer. Everything you need is right here. Documented evidence of predatory rental practices, exploitation of families in crisis, and potential fraud. I'm filing a formal complaint on behalf of the Iron Brotherhood and the families Morrison has harmed. The officer took the folder, flipped through it, and his expression changed. He looked at Morrison. Sir, you're going to need to come down to the station. This is ridiculous, Morrison sputtered. I haven't done anything illegal. Then you won't mind answering some questions, the officer said. Jessica Vance pushed her microphone forward again. Mr. Morrison, how do you respond to accusations that you've intentionally targeted vulnerable families? Morrison shoved past her toward his car. The cameras followed him. The crowd followed him. And when he drove away, lawyer in the passenger seat, face pale with panic, a cheer went up from the people watching. Troy climbed back on his bike. 1 down, he said to Reverend, 1 to go. The ride to Pritchard Manufacturing took 15 minutes. By the time they arrived, word had spread. 30 factory workers stood outside the gates, and Troy recognized Carla Hughes from Rev's description. Stocky mid-40s, arms crossed, looking like she'd been waiting for this moment for 6 months. Gerald Pritchard's car was parked in the executive lot. Troy could see him through the office window, pacing back and forth with a phone pressed to his ear. The Brotherhood parked their bikes and waited. Jessica Vance's crew pulled up moments later, and this time there were 4 news vans instead of 3. The story was already spreading. Carla Hughes walked up to Troy. You're the one who talked to Tommy Reeves. Yes, ma'am. I've got 17 people ready to go on record about what Pritchard's done. Wrongful terminations, medical discrimination, intimidation tactics. We've been documenting it for years, but nobody would listen. Troy smiled. People are listening now. Pritchard emerged from the building, 2 security guards flanking him. He was younger than Morrison, early 40s, and he moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. That confidence faltered when he saw the cameras. This is private property, Pritchard announced. You're all trespassing. Security, clear them out. The security guards looked at the 12 bikers, the news cameras, the crowd of their own co-workers, and didn't move. Come on, Pritchard snapped. Do your jobs. One of the guards, not Tommy Reeves, but a younger man Troy didn't recognize, spoke up. Mr. Pritchard, I think you should listen to what they have to say. Pritchard's face flushed. You're fired. No, Troy said, stepping forward. He's not. Because in about 5 minutes, you're not going to be in a position to fire anyone. He held up another folder, this one compiled by Rev and the workers who'd finally found the courage to speak. 32 wrongful terminations in 3 years. Every single one filed immediately after the employee requested medical leave or filed a workers' compensation claim. You've been systematically purging your workforce of anyone who might cost you money in insurance or medical coverage. Pritchard's lawyer must have been on speed dial because he appeared within minutes, but by then it was too late. The news cameras had everything. Carla Hughes was giving an interview about watching Michael Miller collapse and seeing Pritchard fire him anyway. Other workers were sharing their stories. Cancers, injuries, illnesses, all met with termination and accusations of poor performance. Mr. Pritchard, Jessica Vance called, do you deny firing employees specifically to avoid paying medical benefits? I deny everything, Pritchard said, but his voice shook. This is a coordinated attack by a criminal motorcycle gang. Troy laughed, a sound without humor. Criminal, ma'am, he said, turning to Jessica. The Iron Brotherhood has been operating in the city for 23 years. We're registered as a nonprofit organization. We do charity rides for children's hospitals. We build houses for veterans. We volunteer at food banks. The only thing criminal here is what these 2 men have done to working families. Another police car arrived. The same officer from Morrison's office stepped out, and this time he had a sergeant with him. Mr. Pritchard, the sergeant said, we'd like you to come answer some questions about employment practices at your facility. Pritchard looked at his lawyer. The lawyer looked at the cameras. Nobody had a good option. My client will cooperate fully, the lawyer said, which was lawyer speak for, we're in trouble and we know it. As Pritchard was led to the patrol car, Carla Hughes walked up to Troy. Her eyes were wet. Michael Miller was a good man, she said. He didn't deserve what happened to him. None of them did. I know, Troy said gently. But it ends today. You and the others, you're heroes for speaking up. Don't forget that. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What happens now? Now the system does its job. We've given them everything they need. The evidence, the witnesses, the press coverage. They can't ignore it. They can't bury it. Morrison and Pritchard are done. The Brotherhood rode back to the clubhouse in silence, exhaustion settling over them like a heavy blanket. They'd been awake for 16 hours and the adrenaline was starting to fade. Troy's phone rang. It was Doc. Michael's stable, Doc said. They've started treatment. Sarah's with him. She wanted me to tell you. His voice caught. She wanted me to tell you that you gave them their lives back. Troy closed his eyes. How's Olivia? Linda says she's asleep on the couch with Buddy. The dog's doing better. Ate a full meal. Vet says another few days of care and he'll be fine. Good. That's good. When Troy hung up, Rev was watching him. We did it, Rev said quietly. We started it, Troy corrected. Tomorrow we make sure it finishes. But even as he said it, Troy knew something had shifted. They'd pulled on a thread and the whole fabric was starting to unravel. 47 families Morrison had evicted. 32 employees Pritchard had fired. Those were just the ones they'd found in one day. How many more were out there? How many other Morrisons and Pritchards were hiding in plain sight, destroying lives while the system looked the other way? Troy looked at his crew, tired, angry, determined, and realized that this wasn't over. This was just beginning. And the Iron Brotherhood had just declared war on every predator who thought they were too powerful to touch. Morning came fast and hard. Troy woke at 5:30 to his phone vibrating against the nightstand. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, and 6 voicemails. He sat up, his back complaining about yesterday's ride, and started reading. The first text was from Jessica Vance. Story went national. CNN picked it up. You need to see this. The second was from Nomad. Morrison's lawyer called me. Wants to negotiate. Says his client is willing to settle. The third made Troy's blood run cold. It was from Tommy Reeves. Pritchard's threatening everyone who talked. Says he'll sue for defamation. Workers are scared. Troy called Rev before he'd even gotten out of bed. You see the messages? Rev answered, voice rough with sleep. Yeah, we've got problems. We've got bigger problems than that. Check the news. Troy turned on the television. Channel 7 was running the story on loop footage from yesterday interviews with the evicted family's shots of Morrison being led away by police. But it was the scroll at the bottom of the screen that caught his attention. Breaking landlord Frank Morrison released on bail. Manufacturing executive Gerald Pritchard denies all wrongdoing. They're out, Troy said flatly. Yeah, and now they're fighting back. Morrison's claiming we harassed him. Pritchard's saying we coerced his employees into lying. They're spinning this as a hit job by a biker gang. Troy felt the rage ignite again, colder than before. Where are you two? Clubhouse. Half the crew's already here. We need to talk. Give me 20 minutes. Troy dressed quickly, kissed Linda goodbye. She was still asleep, unaware that the firestorm they'd started yesterday was about to get much worse, and rode to the clubhouse through empty streets. The sun was just starting to rise, painting everything gold and red, and for a moment Troy let himself pretend that everything was simple. Just him and the bike and the road. Then he pulled into the clubhouse lot and saw 11 motorcycles already parked, and reality crashed back down. Inside, the crew was gathered around the television. Someone had made coffee. Nobody was drinking it. They're trying to bury us, Diesel said without preamble. Morrison's got 3 lawyers working on a harassment case. Pritchard's threatening to sue anyone who spoke to the press. And get this, the police are saying there's not enough evidence to press charges. Not enough evidence. Troy's voice came out dangerously quiet. We gave them 47 eviction notices, 32 termination records, witness statements, financial documentation. What the hell else do they need? They need a prosecutor willing to take the case, Rev said. And Morrison and Pritchard have been making donations to the DA's campaign fund for years. Nobody wants to touch it. Troy stood perfectly still, processing this. He'd seen it before in the military, in the streets, in every system that claimed to deliver justice, but only protected the powerful. He'd seen good cases disappear into legal limbo, while the guilty walked free because they could afford the right lawyers and knew the right people. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't going to let it happen. Then we don't wait for the system, Troy said. We make so much noise that the system has no choice but to act. Rev, call every news outlet in the state. Tell them the Iron Brotherhood is holding a press conference at noon in front of City Hall. Diesel, get on social media. I want this story everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. Nomad, contact every family Morrison evicted and every worker Pritchard fired. Tell them we're organizing a protest and we need them there. Chains, you and Doc check on the Millers. Make sure they're safe, and make sure Michael's getting his treatment. What are you going to do? Wrench asked. I'm going to pay a visit to the district attorney and remind him who he actually works for. The DA's office opened at 8. Troy was waiting outside at 7:45, arms crossed, watching the parking lot fill with Mercedes and BMWs and people in suits who'd never worried about rent or medical bills or whether their kids would eat that day. District Attorney Marcus Webb arrived at 7:58 in a black Lexus. He was 52, silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of man who'd spent his entire career climbing ladders and making sure nobody below him got high enough to knock him off. Troy stepped in front of his car. Webb hit the brakes, eyes going wide, then narrowed with recognition. He rolled down the window. Mr. Stone, I've been expecting you. Then you know why I'm here. I know you're upset about yesterday's events, but I assure you. Stop, Troy said. Don't give me the politician speech. I've heard it before and it makes me sick. You've got evidence of criminal exploitation, and you're sitting on it because Morrison and Pritchard write checks to your campaign. Webb's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. It's a fact. Public record shows they've donated over $40,000 to your last 3 campaigns. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to press charges against both of them, or I'm going to make sure every voter in this county knows you let criminals walk because they paid you to. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a choice. Do your job or lose it. Because at noon today, I'm standing in front of City Hall with 47 evicted families, 32 wrongfully terminated workers, and every news camera in the state. And I'm going to ask one very simple question. Why is the DA protecting the men who destroyed these people's lives? Webb stared at Troy for a long moment. You don't know what you're dealing with. Morrison and Pritchard have connections. Powerful people who won't let this go forward. Then those powerful people can explain themselves on national television. Your move, Mr. Webb. Troy walked away before Webb could respond. His phone was ringing before he reached his bike. Troy, it's Jessica Vance. I just got a call from Morrison's legal team. They're offering an exclusive interview if we stop running the story. Tell them no. I already did. But there's something else. I've been digging into Morrison's finances. He's not just a landlord, he owns 12 properties across 3 counties, combined value of over $15 million. And here's the interesting part. Most of those properties were purchased in the last 5 years, right when he started the aggressive eviction pattern. Troy felt something click into place. He's been using the evictions to fund expansion. Exactly. Raise rent, force out tenants who can't pay, flip the property to higher income renters, use the increased revenue to buy more properties. It's a cycle. And Pritchard's doing something similar. Firing sick workers saves him hundreds of thousands in insurance costs, which he's been funneling into offshore accounts. Can you prove it? Give me 48 hours. I've got a forensic accountant looking at everything. But Troy, if this is as bad as I think it is, Morrison and Pritchard aren't just predatory. They're running organized fraud operations. Troy thanked her and hung up. The pieces were coming together, but they were coming together into something bigger and darker than he'd anticipated. This wasn't just 2 men exploiting vulnerable families. This was systematic, calculated, and profitable enough that they'd built empires on it. And empires fought back. His phone rang again. Chains this time. We've got a problem at the hospital. You need to get here, now. Troy didn't ask questions. He just rode. He found Chains and Doc standing outside Michael Miller's hospital room, both looking tense. Through the window, Troy could see Sarah sitting next to Michael's bed, holding his hand. Michael was awake, but barely, pale and thin, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. What happened? Troy asked. Pritchard's lawyer showed up 20 minutes ago, Doc said quietly. Tried to serve Michael with a lawsuit for defamation. Said if Michael doesn't recant his statement about being fired illegally, they'll sue him for everything he has. He doesn't have anything. That's the whole point. The lawyer said they'd go after Sarah's wages, future earnings, anything they can touch. Said they'd make sure the family never financially recovers. Troy felt the cold rage crystallize into something sharp and focused. Where's the lawyer now? Hospital security escorted him out, but Sarah's terrified. She's talking about dropping the whole thing. Says it's not worth losing everything. Troy looked through the window at Sarah, at the fear in her eyes, at Michael barely conscious in the bed, and something inside him snapped. Doc, you stay here. Don't let anyone in that room except medical staff. Chains, you're with me. Where are we going? To have a conversation with Gerald Pritchard. Pritchard Manufacturing looked different in full daylight, with no crowd and no cameras. The parking lot was busy with shift change workers coming and going. Nobody paying attention to the two motorcycles that pulled up to the executive entrance. Troy and Chains walked through the front door like they owned the place. The receptionist, young nervous, stood up quickly. I'm sorry you can't. We're here to see Gerald Pritchard, Troy said calmly. Tell him Troy Stone is here, and if he doesn't see me in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to walk through this building floor by floor until I find him. She picked up the phone with shaking hands. They waited. 53 seconds later, Pritchard appeared from a hallway flanked by two security guards. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, tie loose, the confidence from yesterday completely gone. You're trespassing, Pritchard said. You sent a lawyer to threaten a dying man in his hospital bed, Troy replied. Let's talk about who's crossing lines. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw that lawsuit. You're going to issue a public apology to Michael Miller and every other worker you've fired, and you're going to establish a fund to compensate them for lost wages and medical expenses. Pritchard laughed, a sound without humor. Or what? You'll beat me up. Go ahead. Assault me in front of witnesses. Give my lawyers exactly what they need to destroy you. Troy stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm not going to touch you, Gerald. I don't need to. Because in 2 hours, I'm standing in front of City Hall with every person you've hurt, every reporter in the state, and documented proof that you've been running a fraud operation for years. And when they arrest you, not if, when you're going to find out what it's like to lose everything. Your business, your money, your freedom. And unlike the people you destroyed, you'll deserve every second of it. Pritchard's face had gone white. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your phone. Check the news. This story's already gone national. Your name is trending on Twitter. The State Labor Board opened an investigation this morning, and that's just the beginning. So here's your choice. Do the right thing now, or watch everything you built burn to the ground. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Pritchard's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and whatever he saw made his hands start shaking. Get out, he whispered. Withdraw the lawsuit, Troy said. You've got until noon. They walked out. At 11:45, Troy stood on the steps of City Hall, looking at a crowd that had grown far beyond anything he'd anticipated. The 47 families Morrison had evicted were there. The 32 workers Pritchard had fired were there. But so were hundreds of others, people from the community, other victims' supporters who'd seen the news and decided they were done, watching from the sidelines. The news cameras had multiplied too. Troy counted 11 different outlets, some local, some national. Jessica Vance was front and center with her crew, and she gave him a small nod. Rev stood next to Troy along with Diesel, Chains, Doc, and the rest of the Brotherhood. Behind them, a banner someone had made overnight, read "No Family Left Behind." Troy's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, lawsuit withdrawn. Pritchard. He showed it to Rev, who smiled grimly. One down. At exactly noon, Troy stepped up to the microphone someone had set up. The crowd went quiet. My name is Troy Stone, he said. I'm a veteran, a mechanic, and a member of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. 3 days ago, a 7-year-old girl named Olivia Miller stood in a parking lot and begged me to take her dog because she thought watching him die was worse than losing him forever. That's what desperation looks like. That's what happens when the system fails people. He paused, letting that sink in. Olivia's father, Michael, worked for Gerald Pritchard for 12 years. He was diagnosed with cancer and fired the day he started treatment. Olivia's family paid rent to Frank Morrison for 5 years. When Michael lost his job, Morrison raised their rent by 60% and evicted them when they couldn't pay. Within weeks, they were living in a car. No food, no hope. A little girl choosing between herself and her dog. Someone in the crowd was crying. Troy kept going. We found out that Michael wasn't alone. Pritchard has fired at least 32 employees under similar circumstances. Morrison has evicted at least 47 families using the same tactics. These men have built their wealth by destroying people at their most vulnerable, and the system looked the other way. Why? Someone shouted from the crowd. Because Morrison and Pritchard have money and connections. Because they donate to campaigns and hire expensive lawyers. Because the system protects the powerful and forgets everyone else. But we're not forgetting. We're right here, and we're not going anywhere until justice is served. The crowd erupted in applause. Troy waited for it to die down. Today, Gerald Pritchard withdrew his lawsuit against Michael Miller. That's a start. But it's not enough. We want full investigations. We want criminal charges. We want compensation for every family destroyed, every worker fired, every life ruined. And if the district attorney won't do his job, then we'll make sure the voters know exactly who he's protecting. Marcus Webb was somewhere in that crowd. Troy had spotted him earlier, standing near the back with a face like carved stone. Their eyes met across the distance, and Troy saw the moment Webb made his decision. We want accountability, Troy continued. We want justice. And we want the powerful to know that they can't keep hurting people without consequences. Because if the system won't protect the vulnerable, then we will. More applause, more cheers. Carla Hughes stepped up to the microphone and told her story. Rita Gonzalez told hers. One by one, the victims spoke short testimonies, raw and honest, that painted a picture of systematic cruelty that had gone unchecked for years. By the time the last person spoke, it was 2 p.m, and the crowd had grown to over 500 people. News helicopters circled overhead. Traffic had stopped on the street. Troy's phone rang. It was Webb. You win, the DA said without preamble. I'm filing charges. Morrison and Pritchard both. Fraud, exploitation, racketeering if I can make it stick. But Stone, you need to understand something. These men have resources. This is going to be a long fight. We've got time, Troy said, and we've got something they don't. What's that? The truth, and people who won't give up until it matters. At 3 o'clock, police arrived at Morrison Properties with arrest warrants. Frank Morrison was taken into custody in front of a dozen cameras, handcuffs glinting in the afternoon sun. His lawyer shouted about unlawful prosecution. Nobody listened. At 3:30, Gerald Pritchard was arrested at his home. He didn't shout. He just stared at the ground while officers read him his rights, and Troy, watching the footage on his phone, thought he looked smaller somehow, like the armor of wealth and power had been stripped away to reveal something weak and frightened underneath. By 4 o'clock, both men were being processed at county jail. Bail was set at $500,000 each. Troy sat in the clubhouse watching the news with his crew exhaustion settling over all of them. They'd been running on adrenaline and coffee for 3 days straight, and now that the immediate crisis was over, the crash was hitting hard. We did it, Wrench said quietly. We actually did it. We started it, Troy corrected, echoing what he'd said 2 days ago. The trial's going to take months, maybe longer, and we need to be there for every family affected. This isn't over. But we won, Diesel insisted. You can't tell me we didn't win. Troy thought about Olivia holding that rope, begging him to take her dog. He thought about Sarah sitting in that hospital room, terrified that speaking up would cost her everything. He thought about 47 families and 32 workers who'd been invisible until 3 days ago. Yeah, he said finally. We won, but only because a 7-year-old girl was brave enough to ask for help. Never forget that. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Olivia wants to talk to you. Can you come home? Troy stood his knees, protesting. I've got to go. Rev, you're in charge. Make sure someone's keeping track of all the families. I want regular check-ins. Make sure they've got what they need. Diesel, coordinate with Jessica Vance on the ongoing coverage. Everyone else get some rest. We earned it. He rode home through streets that felt different somehow, like the city had shifted on its axis. Maybe it had. Maybe they'd proven that ordinary people, veterans and mechanics and bikers who society looked at sideways, could stand up against the powerful and win. Maybe they'd proven that justice wasn't just something that happened in courtrooms and law books. Sometimes it happened on the street in parking lots in front of cameras with engines roaring and truth too loud to ignore. At home, Linda met him at the door. She kissed him gently. "You look exhausted," she said. "I am. Where's Olivia?" "Backyard, with Buddy." Troy walked through the house to the back door. Through the window, he could see Olivia sitting in the grass with Buddy sprawled across her lap. The dog looked better. Fur, shinier eyes, brighter tail wagging steadily. Olivia was talking to him, words Troy couldn't hear, and Buddy's ears twitched with every sound. Troy stepped outside. Olivia looked up and smiled a real smile, the first he'd seen from her. "Hi, Mr. Troy." "Hi, sweetheart. Your mom called. Said your dad's doing better. The doctor said the treatment's working. They said he might get to come home in a few weeks." Her voice trembled with hope. "Is that really true?" "That's really true. And we don't have to live in the car anymore." "No, honey, you don't. The Brotherhood's setting your family up in a real apartment. Rent's covered for 6 months while your parents get back on their feet. And your dad's medical bills, we're working on getting those covered too." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being so nice to us?" Troy sat down in the grass next to her. Buddy immediately tried to climb into his lap, tail wagging like crazy, and Troy laughed and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Because everyone deserves help when they need it," Troy said simply. "And because you were brave enough to ask. You saved your family, Olivia. You know that." "I didn't do anything. You did everything." "No. You did the hardest thing. You stood in a parking lot with nothing but hope and asked strangers to care. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. And you reminded all of us why we do this work. You reminded us what matters." She was crying now, silent tears that soaked into Buddy's fur when she pressed her face against him. Troy put his arm around her shoulders and let her cry because sometimes that's all you could do. Sometimes tears were the only way to process everything. The fear, the relief, the impossible weight of carrying too much for too long. After a while, she looked up at him with those storm cloud eyes, and this time they didn't look quite so gray. This time, there was light in them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not taking Buddy, for helping my dad, for everything." "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. Just promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll remember this. Remember that when things are bad, really bad, there are still good people in the world. And promise me that when you grow up, you'll be one of those good people for someone else who needs help." Olivia nodded solemnly. "I promise." Troy smiled and stood up, his back reminding him that he was 54 years old and had been on a motorcycle for 3 days straight. Linda appeared with lemonade and cookies, and they sat in the backyard as the sun started to sink toward the horizon, painting everything gold and orange and impossibly beautiful. Inside, Troy's phone kept buzzing with messages, updates from the crew, interview requests from journalists, thank you texts from families. He ignored all of it. Right now, this moment was what mattered. This little girl who'd almost lost everything sitting safe in the grass with her dog, learning that the world could be cruel, but it could also be kind. Learning that sometimes angels wore leather and rode motorcycles and showed up exactly when you needed them most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The trial, the media circus, the long process of rebuilding lives that had been torn apart. But tonight, they'd won. Tonight, justice had roared loud enough to be heard, and that was enough. 2 months felt like 2 years, and 2 minutes all at once. Troy stood in County Medical's parking lot on a Tuesday morning in late September, watching Michael Miller walk out of the hospital on his own 2 feet, and something in his chest loosened that had been tight since the day he'd met Olivia. Michael was thin, too. Thin, the kind of thin that came from months of poison pumped into your veins to kill the poison already inside you, but he was standing. Sarah held his arm, not because he needed the support, but because she couldn't seem to stop touching him, like she had to keep confirming he was real and solid and still here. Olivia ran ahead with Buddy, the dog healthy now, golden fur shining in the morning sun. And when she turned back to look at her parents, her face held something Troy hadn't seen that first day in the parking lot. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "The doctors said the cancer's in remission," Sarah said when they reached Troy. Her voice still carried disbelief, like she was afraid if she said it too loud, the universe would take it back. "They said it could come back, but right now he's okay." Michael extended his hand, and Troy shook it carefully, aware of how fragile the man still was. "I don't know how to thank you," Michael said quietly. "The treatment, the apartment, the job." "You don't thank me," Troy interrupted gently. "You live. You watch your daughter grow up. You be there for your wife. That's all the thanks anyone needs." Sarah was crying again, but these were different tears than the ones Troy had seen 2 months ago. These were the kind that came from relief so profound it had nowhere else to go. "The apartment's ready," Troy continued. "Fully furnished, first 6 months rent paid, utilities covered. Rev's got the keys. And Sarah, we meant what we said about the job. Garage needs a bookkeeper, position's yours if you want it." "I want it," Sarah said immediately. "I start Monday." "Good. Michael, you focus on getting your strength back. When you're ready, we'll talk about getting you back to work somewhere that actually values you. But no rush. Take your time." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans and exchanging phone numbers, and then the Millers left, packed into Chaines's truck, heading toward their new apartment on the east side of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe, and theirs, and that was everything. Troy watched them go, then climbed on his bike and headed to the clubhouse. There was work to do. There was always work to do. The trial had been set for November, still 6 weeks away, but the legal machinery was already grinding forward. Morrison and Pritchard had both posted bail within 24 hours of their arrests, which meant they were out walking around free to lawyer up and mount their defense. Their strategy was becoming clear: deny everything, attack the credibility of the witnesses, and drag the case out until people got tired and moved on. But people weren't moving on. If anything, the story had grown bigger. The national coverage had brought attention from advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, and investigative journalists who'd started digging into Morrison and Pritchard's financial records. What they'd found made the original 47 evictions and 32 firings look like just the tip of something much darker. Jessica Vance had been right about the offshore accounts. Pritchard had been hiding money in the Cayman Islands for years. Profits skimmed from insurance savings every time he fired a sick worker. The state labor board had opened a federal investigation, and the IRS had gotten involved too. Tax evasion charges were likely coming on top of everything else. Morrison's situation was even worse. His aggressive eviction pattern wasn't limited to this city. He owned properties in 3 counties, and investigators had found evidence of similar exploitation across all of them. Over 200 families affected. Millions of dollars in ill-gotten rent increases. And here was the kicker: Morrison had been using shell companies to hide his ownership, which meant he'd been evading property taxes for years, while simultaneously squeezing tenants for every penny they had. The Brotherhood's clubhouse had become an unofficial headquarters for coordinating the response. Families came through daily, some needing help with legal paperwork, others looking for resources, many just wanting to thank the crew or share their stories. Rev had started keeping a log documenting everything, building a database that would be crucial for the trial. Troy walked into the clubhouse and found chaos. Not bad chaos, productive chaos. Diesel was on the phone with another news outlet. Wrench was helping a family fill out housing assistance forms. Doc was reviewing medical records for workers who'd been fired by Pritchard. Nomad was organizing a food drive for families still struggling to get back on their feet. "Troy," Rev called from across the room. "We've got a situation." Troy's shoulders tensed. "What kind of situation?" "The good kind, I think. Come look at this." Rev's laptop showed a GoFundMe page that had been started by someone in the community. Troy didn't know who to help the affected families. The goal had been $50,000. The current total was approaching $300,000. "Jesus," Troy muttered. "It gets better. 3 different law firms have offered to represent the families pro bono. A housing nonprofit contacted us about helping relocate people who are still homeless. And this morning the mayor's office called." "What did they want?" They want to meet with us, officially. They're calling it a community dialogue about predatory business practices and housing reform. Troy sat down slowly. They're covering their asses. Of course they are, but they're also acknowledging the problem, which means we've got leverage. We can push for actual policy changes, rent control tenant protections, medical leave laws that actually have teeth. It was more than Troy had dared hope for. They'd started this, trying to help one family, and somehow it had snowballed into something that might actually change the system itself. "When's the meeting?" Troy asked. "Thursday afternoon. You, me, and Diesel are invited. So are representatives from the affected families. Make sure Carla Hughes and Rita Gonzalez are there. They've earned a seat at that table." Rev nodded and made a note. "There's something else. We've been getting calls from other towns. People who've seen the coverage and think they might have similar situations happening in their communities. Landlords exploiting tenants. Employers firing sick workers. Same patterns, different places." Troy rubbed his face. "We can't help everyone." "No, but we can share what we learned. How we organized, how we gathered evidence, how we got the media involved. We can give people a blueprint." It made sense, but it also made Troy tired just thinking about it. The last 2 months had been non-stop coordinating families, dealing with lawyers, talking to press, managing the crew. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, barely stopped moving long enough to process everything that had happened. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Olivia drew you a picture. She wants to give it to you." And just like that, the exhaustion didn't matter. This was why they did it. For kids like Olivia who got to draw pictures instead of begging strangers to take their dogs. For families like the Millers who got second chances they'd earned but never received. For communities that learned they didn't have to accept cruelty as inevitable. "Set up the meeting with the mayor," Troy said, "and Rev start putting together that blueprint. If we can help other towns avoid what happened here, we do it." The next few weeks blurred together. The meeting with the mayor happened tense. Formal, everyone choosing their words carefully, but it resulted in a task force being formed to study housing practices and employment protections. Not perfect, but progress. The trial preparations intensified. The prosecution's case was solid. They had documentation, witnesses, expert testimony, and the financial records Jessica Vance's forensic accountant had uncovered. Morrison and Pritchard's lawyers were good, but they were fighting uphill against the weight of evidence and public opinion. More families came forward. People who'd been too scared before now felt safe enough to speak. The count of affected families climbed from 47 to 63 to 82. The count of wrongfully terminated workers went from 32 to 51 to 74. Every new number was a punch to the gut. Every new story was another reminder of how long this had been going on. How many people had suffered in silence because they thought nobody would care. But people cared now. The whole town cared. Maybe the whole country. 3 weeks before the trial, Troy got a call from Marcus Webb. "Pritchard wants to make a deal," the DA said without preamble. "Pleads guilty to fraud and labor law violations, agrees to pay restitution to all affected workers, surrenders his business assets, serves 5 years minimum." Troy's first instinct was to say no. 5 years wasn't enough for what Pritchard had done. But then he thought about the families who'd been waiting months for justice, who'd been dragged through depositions and interviews and legal paperwork, who deserved closure more than they deserved revenge. What about Morrison? Still fighting. His lawyers think they can beat it, or at least get it knocked down to civil violations. But if Pritchard takes the deal, it puts more pressure on Morrison. Shows the jury that even Pritchard's own lawyers knew he was guilty. "Talk to the families first," Troy said. "See what they want. This isn't my decision to make. Troy, these people look to you, which is why I'm telling you to ask them directly. They've been voiceless long enough. Let them decide." Webb sighed, but agreed. Over the next week, he and his team reached out to every worker Pritchard had fired. The response was nearly unanimous: take the deal. They wanted their money, they wanted Pritchard punished, but most of all, they wanted it to be over. Carla Hughes said it best when Troy talked to her. 5 years in prison, losing his business, paying back everything he stole, that's justice. Not perfect justice, but real justice. And I'll take real over perfect any day. Pritchard accepted the deal on a Thursday morning. The news cameras were there to capture him, walking into court, standing before the judge, saying the words that ended his freedom and his empire. He looked smaller somehow. shoulders slumped, the arrogance completely gone. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Pritchard was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "I'm sorry. For what I did. For the people I hurt. I'm sorry. It wasn't much. It didn't undo the damage. But it was something, and something was more than victims usually got." Morrison's trial started 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed, families in the gallery, press in the back row. Brotherhood members scattered throughout, providing support and presence. Troy sat next to Sarah Miller, who'd taken time off from her new job to be there. Michael was home resting, still building back his strength, but he'd wanted Sarah to witness this. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. They walked the jury through Morrison's pattern step by step, identifying vulnerable families, raising rent, during crises, evicting, when they couldn't pay, re-renting at higher rates. They showed the financial records proving he'd made millions doing it. They brought in expert witnesses who explained how Morrison's actions qualified as fraud and exploitation under state law. Morrison's defense was predictable. He claimed he was just running a business, that rent increases were normal market adjustments, that the evictions were legal and justified. His lawyers tried to paint him as a victim of a vindictive smear campaign orchestrated by a biker gang with a grudge. It might have worked if the jury hadn't heard from the families themselves. Rita Gonzalez took the stand on day 3 and told her story. 6 years of on-time rent payments, 1 medical emergency, and suddenly, she was homeless. She cried when she described sleeping on her sister's couch while her adult son slept nearby, cramped and ashamed and powerless. The jury listened with expressions that went from neutral to sympathetic to outright angry. Another tenant testified about being evicted 2 weeks after her husband died, leaving her a widow with 3 kids and nowhere to go. Another talked about losing his job and having his rent doubled within the same month. Another described Morrison's property manager threatening her when she asked for time to catch up on payments. Story after story, family after family. The same pattern repeated over and over until it was impossible to deny what Morrison had been doing. On day 7, Morrison's lawyer made a mistake. He tried to cross-examine a tenant named David Chen, a quiet man in his 60s, who'd been evicted after the factory he worked at closed. The lawyer suggested David was exaggerating his hardship, implying he could have found another job if he'd tried harder. David looked at the lawyer with complete calm and said, "I worked at that factory for 38 years. I never missed a day. I raised 2 kids in Mr. Morrison's apartment. I paid my rent every month for 15 years. When the factory closed, I applied to 73 jobs in 6 weeks. Nobody wanted to hire a 62-year-old man. So Mr. Morrison raised my rent from $900 to $1,400, and when I couldn't pay, he evicted me with 30 days' notice. I've been living in my car for 8 months. If you think I'm exaggerating, you're welcome to spend a night in that car with me." The courtroom went dead silent. Even the judge looked shaken. The lawyer mumbled something about no further questions and sat down. That night, Troy got a call from Webb. "Morrison's lawyers are talking about a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Guilty plea, 7 years minimum, full restitution, forfeiture of all property assets. His empire gets liquidated and the money goes to the families." 7 years. It's 2 more than Pritchard got. And Troy, the restitution we're talking about could be upwards of $10 million. Split between 82 families, that's life-changing money. Troy thought about Rita sleeping on her sister's couch, about David living in his car, about the Millers crammed into that sedan with no food and no hope, about Olivia standing in a parking lot offering to give up everything she loved. "Talk to the families," Troy said again. "Let them decide." This time the response wasn't unanimous. Some wanted Morrison to face a jury verdict, to be publicly condemned by 12 of his peers. Others wanted the certainty of a guilty plea and the guarantee of restitution. Arguments broke out, heated discussions about justice versus pragmatism, revenge versus recovery. Troy attended one of these meetings at a community center, listening as people who'd been victimized together now struggled to agree on the path forward. Rita argued for accepting the deal. David wanted a verdict. Others fell somewhere in between. Finally, Sarah Miller, who'd been quiet through most of the debate, stood up. "I've been thinking about what my daughter did," Sarah said softly. The room quieted. Olivia walked up to a group of strangers and asked for help because she couldn't keep fighting alone. And you know what happened? The strangers helped. They didn't just help Olivia, they helped all of us. And they helped because it was right, not because it would benefit them. She looked around the room. Morrison stole from us. He hurt us. He treated us like we were disposable, but we're not disposable. We're people with families and dignity and value. And if we spend all our energy trying to make him suffer more, we're giving him power he doesn't deserve. The deal puts him in prison. It takes everything he has. It gives us resources to rebuild. That's not perfect, but it's enough. It has to be enough because if we wait for perfect justice, we'll be waiting forever. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Rita nodded. David nodded. One by one, the others nodded too. Morrison accepted the plea deal the next morning. The judge sentenced him to 7 years, no possibility of parole until he served at least 5. When the gavel came down, Troy heard someone in the gallery whisper, "Thank God. Thank God it's finally over." But it wasn't over. Not really. The legal fight was done, but the recovery was just beginning. The Brotherhood spent the next month helping coordinate the restitution distribution. $10 million divided among 82 families meant roughly $120,000 per family, enough to cover back rent, moving costs, medical bills, and a cushion to rebuild. Some families used it to buy homes. Others invested in education or started small businesses. A few put it away for their kids' futures. The Miller family's share covered Michael's remaining medical expenses and gave them a down payment on a small house with a yard where Buddy could run. Sarah kept her job at the garage, and Michael eventually found work at a veteran-owned manufacturing plant that actually valued its employees. Olivia started 3rd grade at a new school. She made friends. She joined the soccer team. She drew pictures and played with Buddy and slowly stopped looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next crisis. Troy visited them one Saturday afternoon in November, pulling up to their new house on a street lined with maple trees, turning gold and red. Olivia was in the front yard teaching Buddy to catch a frisbee badly because Buddy was enthusiastic but uncoordinated, and when she saw Troy, she ran over and hugged him hard. "Look what we got." She dragged him to the backyard where Michael had built a small garden. Tomato plants, herbs, a few late-season vegetables. "Dad says we're going to grow our own food. Isn't that cool?" "That's real cool, sweetheart." Sarah came out with lemonade and they sat on the back porch while Olivia played with Buddy. Michael joined them, still thin but stronger than he'd been, color returning to his face. "Doctor says if the cancer stays gone for another year, I'll officially be in long-term remission," Michael said. 5 years after that and I'll be considered cured." "That's great news." "Troy, I need to say something." Michael set down his lemonade. "What you did for us, for all of us, I'll never be able to repay that." "I don't want." "I know. You keep saying we don't owe you anything. But I'm a father, and fathers teach their kids about right and wrong, so I need my daughter to understand what you did because someday she's going to have a choice. Someday she's going to see someone who needs help, and she'll have to decide if she gets involved or looks away. And I want her to remember that when she needed help, you didn't look away. None of you did." Troy's throat felt tight. "She's a good kid. She's going to be a good person. Because of you." "No. Because of you and Sarah. You raised her right. All I did was give her a chance to keep being that kid instead of growing up too fast because the world was too cruel." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Olivia play. The sun was warm. The air smelled like autumn leaves, and for the first time in months, Troy felt something close to peace. "The trial changed things," Sarah said suddenly. "Not just for us, for everyone. People are talking about tenant rights now. The mayor's task force is actually doing work. The city council passed new protections for renters. None of that would have happened if you hadn't stood up." Troy shook his head. "I didn't stand up first. Olivia did. She's the one who started this. Rest of us just followed her lead." As if she'd heard her name, Olivia came running over Buddy at her heels. "Mr. Troy, are you staying for dinner? Mom's making spaghetti." "I'd love to, but I've got to get back to the clubhouse. Rain check." "Okay." She hugged him again. "Will you come to my soccer game next week?" "Wouldn't miss it." Driving away from the house, Troy thought about everything that had happened since that morning in the diner parking lot. 2 months that had changed dozens of lives. 2 men in prison. Millions of dollars returned to people who'd been robbed. Policy changes that would protect future tenants and workers. A community that had learned it could fight back and win. And one little girl who'd been brave enough to ask for help, who was now playing in her own backyard with her dog safe and fed and loved. That was worth everything. Every sleepless night, every confrontation, every moment of doubt. All of it worth this one simple outcome. A family restored, a childhood saved, hope replacing despair. Troy's phone buzzed. A text from Rev, another town, called. They've got a situation with a predatory payday lender. Want to help? Troy smiled. The work never stopped. People needed help, and the Brotherhood would be there. He typed back, "Send me the details." Justice didn't end with one trial. It wasn't something you achieved once and then walked away from. Justice was ongoing work, daily decisions, people choosing again and again to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. The Brotherhood had started something in this town, but it was bigger than them now. It was a movement, a reminder, a promise that the powerful didn't get to hurt people without consequences, that the vulnerable weren't forgotten. That community meant something more than just living near each other. It meant watching out for each other. It meant showing up. It meant being willing to get involved even when it wasn't easy or convenient. It meant remembering that every person had value, and that value didn't disappear just because someone was struggling. Troy rode through town as the sun set, painting everything orange and gold, and he felt the satisfaction of work, well done, mixing with the anticipation of work still ahead. There would always be more Pritchards and Morrisons. There would always be people who needed help. But there would also always be people willing to help. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. The clubhouse was decorated with balloons and streamers that looked completely out of place against the motorcycle parts and leather jackets, but nobody seemed to care. Troy stood near the bar watching Wrench try to hang a banner that kept falling down, and he couldn't stop the smile spreading across his face. "Higher on the left," Rev called out. "No, your other left." "I know my lefts, old man," Wrench shot back, but he adjusted the banner anyway. It read, "Happy Birthday." Olivia, in bright purple letters, her favorite color Linda had told them, and beneath it someone had drawn a cartoon dog that looked vaguely like Buddy, if Buddy had been designed by someone who'd never actually seen a dog. "When did we become party planners?" Diesel asked, carrying in a cake box from the bakery downtown. "When a certain 7-year-old saved her family and reminded us why we do this work," Troy said. "You got a problem with that?" Diesel grinned. "Not even a little bit." The party was Troy's idea. Olivia's 8th birthday, her first birthday in the new house, her first birthday since everything changed. Linda had suggested having it at their place, but Troy wanted it here. Wanted Olivia to see the clubhouse, to meet the whole crew, to understand that the men who'd helped her family weren't just Troy, but all of them. That she had an extended family now, whether she knew it or not. Sarah had been hesitant at first when Troy called to invite them. "Are you sure a motorcycle clubhouse seems like an odd place for an 8-year-old's birthday party?" "Mrs. Miller, we've hosted everything from veterans benefits to charity fundraisers to wedding receptions in this building. Trust me, we can handle one birthday party. Besides, there's someone here who wants to meet Olivia." "Who?" "You'll see." Now, an hour before the party was set to start, Troy watched his crew transform the space. Tiny had brought decorations. Doc had organized games, pinned the tail on the donkey musical chairs, stuff Troy hadn't thought about since his own kids were small. Chains had set up a photo booth with props. Nomad was working on a playlist of kid-friendly music, which was harder than it sounded when most of their usual selections involved songs about riding free and breaking hearts. "Troy," Linda called from the doorway. "They're here." Troy walked outside and found the Miller family climbing out of their car. Michael looked good, better than good, actually. He'd gained weight color in his face, moving without the exhaustion that had marked him before. Sarah was smiling relaxed in a way Troy had never seen. And Olivia bounded out of the back seat with Buddy on a leash, both of them practically vibrating with excitement. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Troy said, giving Olivia a hug. "Thank you for inviting us. Buddy's never been to a party before." "Well, we'll have to make sure it's a good first time. Come on, there's people waiting to meet you." Inside, the crew had assembled 12 bikers in leather and denim, tattooed and bearded, looking completely ridiculous, surrounded by purple balloons and birthday decorations. But when Olivia walked in, every single one of them smiled. "This is the young lady who started everything," Troy said, his hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Olivia Miller, meet the Iron Brotherhood." They introduced themselves one by one, Rev and Doc and Diesel and Chains, and all the others, and Olivia shook hands with each of them, with the kind of seriousness that only an 8-year-old could muster. Buddy sniffed everyone enthusiastically, tail-wagging, completely unaware that he was partly responsible for bringing these people together. "We got you something," Rev said, holding out a wrapped box. "Well, technically it's for Buddy, but we figured you'd appreciate it too." Olivia tore open the wrapping paper and pulled out a small leather vest, perfectly sized for a golden retriever. On the back, embroidered in gold thread, it said, "Honorary Iron Brotherhood." Her eyes went wide. "Really, Buddy can be in your club." "Every club needs a good dog," Doc said seriously. "And Buddy's about the best dog I've ever met. Plus he's got the right attitude, loyal, brave, doesn't quit even when things are hard. That's brotherhood material right there." Sarah was crying happy tears, this time the kind Troy was getting used to seeing. Michael stood with his arm around her, looking at the bikers with an expression that said he was trying very hard not to cry too. They put the vest on Buddy, who immediately tried to eat it, then decided he liked it and pranced around, showing it off to everyone. Olivia laughed, pure, uncomplicated laughter that filled the whole space, and Troy felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for months. This was why they did it. The party kicked into full gear. Kids from Olivia's new school showed up. Sarah had invited her classmates, and their parents had been curious enough about the infamous Iron Brotherhood to actually bring them. There was an awkward moment when the parents first arrived, clearly uncertain about letting their children into a biker clubhouse, but Linda handled it with her usual grace. "Welcome. The cake's over there, games are set up in the back, and if you have any questions, just ask. We're all just regular people who happen to ride motorcycles." One mother looked at the men gathered around the punch bowl and whispered something to her husband. Troy caught the words dangerous and inappropriate. Before he could respond, Olivia appeared at the woman's elbow. "They saved my life," she said simply. "My dad was dying and we didn't have anywhere to live, and Mr. Troy and his friends helped us. They're heroes." The woman's expression shifted. "Oh, I didn't realize." "Most people don't," Sarah said, coming up behind Olivia. "They see the motorcycles and the leather and they make assumptions. But these men are the reason my family's still together. They're the reason my husband's alive. So I'd appreciate it if you gave them a chance." After that, the atmosphere loosened. The parents relaxed. The kids played games and ate cake and had the kind of fun that children were supposed to have at birthday parties. Troy watched from the sidelines, nursing a soda and feeling older than his 54 years, but in a good way. "You did good, brother," Rev said, appearing beside him. "We did good," Troy corrected. "All of us." "Yeah, but it was your call to get involved. Some people would have walked away." "Some people aren't worth knowing." Rev laughed. "Truth." He paused. "You hear about the situation in Riverside?" Troy had. Another town, another predatory landlord, another group of families being systematically exploited. The Brotherhood had been consulting, sharing their strategies, connecting the families with lawyers and press, providing support from a distance. "They're making progress," Troy said. "Following our blueprint. Should have the evidence they need within a month. It's spreading. What we did here, it's showing people that they can fight back, that they're not powerless." "Good. That's exactly what needs to spread." A commotion near the cake table drew their attention. Buddy had managed to get his head stuck in the present pile, and Olivia was trying to extract him while her friends laughed. Doc rushed over to help, and within minutes, the dog was free, looking extremely pleased with himself, despite the bow stuck to his ear. "Speech time," Linda announced, clapping her hands. "Troy, get up there." Troy hadn't planned on making a speech, but he found himself walking to the front of the room anyway. The kids quieted down mostly, and the adults turned to listen. "I'm not good at this kind of thing," Troy started. "I'm better with motorcycles than words, but I wanted to say something about why we're all here today. 4 months ago, I was sitting at Rosie's diner thinking about breakfast, and nothing more complicated than that. Then a little girl walked up to me, holding a rope attached to a dog that was dying, and she asked me to take him so he wouldn't starve. And in that moment, she gave me gave all of us a choice. He looked at Olivia, who was sitting on the floor with Buddy's head in her lap. We could have said no. We could have given her some money and told her good luck and gone back to our breakfast. That would have been easier. That would have been simpler. But Olivia, you asked us to see you, really see you, and once we saw you, we couldn't look away. Sarah was crying again. Michael had his arm around her, his own eyes wet. What you did took incredible courage, Troy continued. Standing there with nothing, asking strangers for help, that's harder than anything I ever did in the Marines. And you taught us something important. You taught us that sometimes the people who need help most are the ones brave enough to ask for it. And you reminded us that helping isn't about expecting something in return. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that your suffering matters, that your family deserves the same chance as anyone else's. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 4 months ago, you and Buddy were starving in a parking lot. Today, you're in your own house with your dad healthy and your mom working and a future that looks bright. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because you were brave, and because good people decided to act, and because this community remembered what it means to take care of each other. Troy looked around the room at his crew, at the families they'd helped, at the parents who'd been skeptical and were now listening intently. The world's full of people like Pritchard and Morrison. People who see others as opportunities to exploit, who profit from suffering, who think power means you can hurt people without consequences. But the world's also full of people like everyone in this room. People who show up. People who stand up. People who decide that compassion matters more than convenience. You're going to meet both kinds of people as you grow up, Olivia. And someday you're going to have to choose which kind you want to be. But I already know which kind you'll choose because you've already shown us. When you had nothing, you thought about saving Buddy. When you were scared, you asked for help. When you got that help, you didn't forget how it felt to need it. That's who you are. Don't ever lose that. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping Michael. Standing up, tears running down his face, and everyone else joined in. Olivia ran over and hugged Troy hard, and he crouched down to her level. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For not taking Buddy. For helping my daddy. For being my friend. Thank you, Troy said back. For reminding me why any of this matters. The party continued for another hour. Cake was eaten. Presents were opened. Photos were taken. Olivia received books and toys and clothes, but her favorite gift came from chains. A small leather jacket sized for an 8-year-old, with honorary Iron Brotherhood embroidered on the back to match Buddy's vest. She put it on immediately and refused to take it off even though it was warm in the clubhouse. She wore it while playing games, while cutting the cake, while saying goodbye to her classmates. And when the party finally wound down and most of the guests had left, she was still wearing it. I think you made an impression, Sarah said to Troy as they were cleaning up. She made the impression, Troy said. We just followed through. Michael came over, and for a moment the three adults just stood there watching Olivia play with Buddy in the corner of the clubhouse. The dog was tired but happy, the vest still on the bow, finally removed from his ear. I got my test results back yesterday, Michael said quietly. The cancer's still in remission. Doctor says I'm doing better than expected. Says whatever I've been doing, keep doing it. That's fantastic, Troy said, meaning it with everything he had. I've been thinking about what you said, about how Olivia taught you something. Michael paused. She taught me something too. She taught me that sometimes you have to let people help. I spent so long trying to handle everything on my own, trying to be strong for my family, that I forgot there's strength in accepting help too, in trusting that other people care enough to show up. That's a hard lesson to learn, Troy said. Yeah, it is, but I'm glad I learned it. Because if Olivia hadn't been brave enough to walk up to you that morning, I wouldn't be here. My family wouldn't be here. And I think about that every single day. I think about how close we came to losing everything and how we didn't lose it, because people we'd never met decided we were worth saving. Sarah wiped her eyes. We're never going to forget this, any of this, and we're going to make sure Olivia remembers too. Because someday she needs to do for someone else what you did for us. That's how this works, right? You help people who help other people, who help other people, and eventually the world becomes a little less cruel. That's exactly how it works, Troy agreed. They said their goodbyes slowly with promises to visit soon and invitations to the next Brotherhood charity event. Olivia hugged every single member of the crew, thanking them individually for coming to her party. Buddy wagged his tail and licked anyone within reach, his vest slightly askew but still proudly displayed. As the Miller family drove away, Olivia waving from the back window, Buddy's head visible beside her, Rev came to stand next to Troy. "Hell of a thing we did," Rev said. "Hell of a thing," Troy agreed. "You think it matters long-term, I mean. We saved one family. We put 2 bastards in prison. But there's more families out there. More bastards. We can't save everyone." Troy thought about that question for a long moment, watching the taillights disappear down the street. "No, we can't save everyone, but we saved the Millers. And the Millers are going to raise Olivia to be the kind of person who helps others. And maybe she saves a family someday. And maybe that family raises kids who help others. It ripples out, you know. Every act of kindness, every moment of choosing to care, it matters. Maybe not in some grand save-the-world way, but it matters to the people it touches." "You get philosophical in your old age," Rev said, but he was smiling. "I get philosophical when 8-year-olds teach me lessons about courage." They cleaned up the clubhouse in comfortable silence, taking down decorations and packing away leftover cake. The other brothers drifted out one by one until it was just Troy and Rev and Linda who'd been quietly managing logistics all day. "That was a good party," Linda said, kissing Troy's cheek. "You did good." "We did good," Troy said, "because it was always we, never just him." That was what brotherhood meant. Shared purpose, shared responsibility, shared joy when things worked out. 3 weeks later, Troy got a package in the mail. Inside was a drawing crayon on construction paper, the kind of art that only a child could make. It showed a group of motorcycles, each with a stick figure rider, and in the center was a girl holding a dog's leash. Above it, in careful handwriting that had clearly taken time and effort, Olivia had written, "Thank you for being my angels." Troy taped it to the wall of the clubhouse right above the bar, where everyone could see it. It stayed there for years, a reminder of why they did what they did, of what mattered, of the responsibility that came with power and resources, and the ability to help. Other cases came and went. The Brotherhood helped a veteran facing eviction. They supported a single mother dealing with medical debt. They consulted with communities facing exploitation similar to what had happened here. Some cases were successful, others weren't. But they showed up for all of them because showing up was what separated those who cared from those who just said they did. The town changed too. The mayor's task force led to actual policy reforms, stronger tenant protections, stricter oversight of employment practices, better enforcement of existing laws. It wasn't perfect. Systems never were. But it was better than before, and better was worth fighting for. Pritchard served his 5 years and got out a broken man, his business gone, his reputation destroyed, facing a lifetime of explaining his criminal record to anyone who'd listen. Morrison served 7 years and came out to find that his properties had been sold off, the money distributed to his victims, and his name synonymous with exploitation. Neither man would recover what they'd lost, and nobody shed tears for them. The families they'd hurt did recover, though, slowly, painfully, with setbacks and struggles, but they recovered. They found new jobs and new homes and new reasons to hope. They learned that bad things happening didn't mean bad things always happened, that cruelty wasn't inevitable, that community could be real and meaningful and powerful. And Olivia Miller grew up. Troy watched her grow over the years, staying connected with the family, attending her school plays and soccer games and birthday parties. He watched her go from that scared 7-year-old in the parking lot to a confident teenager who volunteered at food banks and organized fundraisers for homeless families and talked about becoming a social worker when she grew up. "I want to help people like you helped us," she told Troy when she was 16, sitting in the garage where Sarah still kept the books. "I want to be there for families who don't have anywhere else to turn." "You'll be good at it," Troy said, meaning it. "You've got the most important qualification. You understand what it feels like to need help. That empathy, that memory, don't ever lose it." "I won't, I promise." And she kept that promise. Went to college on a scholarship funded partly by the restitution money and partly by the Brotherhood's education fund. Got her degree in social work. Came back to the town and started working with at-risk families, providing the kind of advocacy and support that should have been there for the Millers from the start, but wasn't. And whenever anyone asked her why she did that work, why she spent her days fighting systems and bureaucracy and indifference on behalf of people most of society ignored, she'd tell them about a morning when she was 7 years old and desperate, standing in a parking lot with a dying dog, asking strangers for mercy she'd been taught she didn't deserve. She'd tell them about bikers who could have said no, but didn't. About men who society judged by their appearance, but who proved that character had nothing to do with leather jackets or tattoos or motorcycles. About a community that learned justice wasn't something that happened in courtrooms, but something that happened every day, in small decisions to care about people you didn't have to care about. She'd tell them that sometimes angels wore leather, and sometimes the scariest-looking people were the safest ones to trust. And sometimes the whole world changed because someone was brave enough to ask for help, and someone else was brave enough to give it. Troy retired from the Brotherhood at 63, his knees finally giving out his back, reminding him daily that he'd spent too many years on motorcycles and not enough on couches. Rev took over as president, maintaining the traditions and the mission and the commitment to being there for people who needed them. The clubhouse still had Olivia's drawing on the wall. New members would ask about it, and the older members would tell the story, embellishing slightly over time, the way stories do, but keeping the essential truth intact. A girl, a dog, a choice, a family saved, a community transformed. And every year on Olivia's birthday, the Brotherhood held a fundraiser. They called it the Buddy Fund, and it provided emergency assistance to families and crisis money for food, rent, medical bills, whatever was needed. It started small, but grew, funded by donations and charity rides and people who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of something good. Thousands of families benefited over the years. Some needed a few $100s to keep the lights on. Others needed thousands to avoid eviction. The Brotherhood provided it without judgment, without requirements, without expecting anything in return. Just helping because they could, because it mattered, because a little girl had taught them that mercy wasn't weakness and compassion wasn't optional. Troy died at 71 peacefully in his sleep, Linda beside him. His funeral was standing room only, hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched, families he'd helped, brothers he'd ridden with. Olivia spoke at the service, now 33 years old, tears streaming down her face as she told the congregation about the day she met Troy Stone. "I was 7, she said, voice breaking. "I was scared and hungry and desperate. I had no reason to think anyone would help me, but Troy did. Troy and his brothers saw a child in need and decided that helping mattered more than convenience. They saved my father's life. They saved my family. They saved me." She paused, composing herself. Troy used to say that what they did wasn't special, that anyone would have done the same. But that's not true. Most people walked past us in that parking lot. Most people saw my family falling apart and did nothing. Troy was different. Troy chose to care. And that choice, that single moment of deciding that we mattered, changed everything. I've spent my career trying to be like Troy, trying to see people the way he saw me, with compassion, with dignity, with the understanding that circumstances don't define worth. And I've learned what Troy knew all along, that the world doesn't change through grand gestures or dramatic interventions. It changes through small decisions made by ordinary people who refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable. She looked out at the congregation, at the Iron Brotherhood members in their leather and denim, at the families they'd helped over decades, at the community they'd built through nothing more complicated than showing up and caring. Troy Stone was a hero, Olivia said firmly. Not because he wore a uniform or won medals or did anything that history books will remember. He was a hero because when a scared child asked him for help, he said yes. Because he taught me that angels can wear leather, that family isn't just blood, and that one person deciding to care can change everything. She smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Troy, for saving Buddy, for saving my father, for saving me, for teaching me what it means to be good. I hope wherever you are, you know how much you mattered. I hope you know that the kindness you showed rippled out into the world and made it better. I hope you know that you were loved." The church was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Quiet tears shed for a man who'd lived his values, who'd made the world gentler than he found it, who'd proven that sometimes the roughest exteriors house the softest hearts. Buddy, now 12 years old and graying around the muzzle, but still loyal and loving, sat at Olivia's feet during the service, wearing the vest that said Honorary Iron Brotherhood. He didn't understand that Troy was gone, but he understood that everyone was sad, so he did what dogs do best. He offered comfort without words, presence without judgment, love without conditions. After the service, the Brotherhood did what they always did. They rode. Dozens of motorcycles formed a procession behind the hearse engines, roaring in tribute, the sound echoing through streets where Troy had ridden for decades. People stopped and watched, some saluting, others just standing in respect, all of them recognizing that something important was passing. At the cemetery, Rev gave the final eulogy. "Troy Stone was my brother," he said simply, "in every way that mattered. He taught me that power without compassion is cruelty, that resources without generosity are wasted, and that the measure of a man isn't what he takes, but what he gives. He taught me that we're all connected, that your pain matters to me, that there's no such thing as someone else's problem. And he lived those lessons every single day of his life." Rev's voice grew stronger. "Troy's gone, but what he built remains. The families we've helped, the systems we've changed, the example we've set. And most importantly, the people like Olivia who grew up watching Troy care and decided they wanted to care too. That's immortality. That's legacy. That's what it means to matter." They buried Troy with full honors, a flag draped over his casket, brothers surrounding his grave, Olivia standing close by with Buddy at her side. And when it was done and people started drifting away, Olivia stayed behind for a few more minutes. "Thank you," she whispered to the headstone. "For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For helping when nobody else would. For teaching me that I mattered, even when I felt like I didn't. I promise I'll keep doing what you taught me. I promise I'll help people the way you helped us. I promise your work won't end just because you did." She laid a single flower on the grave, a sunflower bright and golden like Buddy's coat, like hope itself. Then she walked away, the dog at her heels, both of them heading back into a world that was better because Troy Stone had lived in it. The Iron Brotherhood continued its work. New members joined, carrying forward the traditions and the mission. The Buddy Fund kept growing, kept helping families, kept proving that compassion wasn't weakness and mercy wasn't optional. And every person they helped heard the story about Olivia and Buddy and Troy and the morning when everything changed because someone decided to care. That story spread further than anyone expected. Other motorcycle clubs took up similar missions. Community organizations formed based on the Brotherhood's model. People who'd never ridden a motorcycle in their lives started asking themselves the question Troy had lived by, what do I do when I see someone suffering? Do I look away or do I help? More and more people chose to help, and slowly, quietly, without fanfare or headlines, the world became a little less cruel. Not perfect, not even close, but better than before. Better because a 7-year-old girl had been brave enough to ask for help. Better because a group of bikers had been brave enough to give it. Better because people remembered that everyone deserves dignity, compassion, and a chance to survive the hardest moments of their lives. Years passed. Olivia became a grandmother herself, telling her grandchildren about the day she met the Iron Brotherhood. Buddy's vest, worn and faded but still intact, hung in a frame in her office, a reminder of where she came from and why her work mattered. And sometimes when she was helping a family in crisis, she'd think about Troy and smile. She'd think about how one moment of kindness could ripple forward through decades, touching lives that never even knew where the ripple started. She'd think about how the world changed not through dramatic revolution, but through quiet decisions to care about people you didn't have to care about. She'd think about angels in leather and dogs in vests and parking lots where miracles happened because someone chose mercy over indifference. And she'd remember what Troy told her that first day, words that had guided her entire life. We don't leave family behind. And right now, your family. That was the truth that mattered. That was the lesson worth learning. That was the legacy worth leaving. No family should have to choose between love and survival. No child should have to beg strangers to save their dog. No person should face their darkest moment alone while the world looks away. And when good people decide those things are unacceptable, when they decide to show up and care and fight for those who can't fight for themselves, everything changes. Sometimes angels wear leather. Sometimes hellraisers are exactly what heaven needs. And sometimes the most important thing anyone can do is say yes when a desperate voice asks for help. That was Troy Stone's gift to the world. That was the Iron Brotherhood's mission. That was Olivia Miller's inheritance, the knowledge that she mattered, that her family mattered, that everyone mattered, and that choosing to care was the most powerful thing any human being could do. The story didn't end with Troy's death. It continued in every family the Brotherhood helped, every policy they influenced, every person who heard about what they did and decided to do something similar in their own community. It continued in Olivia's work, in her children's values, in a legacy of compassion that spread further than anyone could have imagined, when it all started with a girl and a dog and a parking lot full of motorcycles. And somewhere in all of that, in the families restored and the lives saved and the community transformed, there was a simple truth that Troy had understood better than most. Justice wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you made happen. And sometimes all it took was one person brave enough to ask for it, and another person brave enough to deliver it, and everything that came after was just the world remembering what it meant to be human.